Have you ever struggled to make a decision based how others will perceive you? Maybe you haven't taken that leap of leaving your job, that relationship, that habit, that something that's just keeping where you're at. And if you're a man and you've experienced, or you know a man that has experienced sexual trauma or abuse, this episode is going to be for you, as it's a unique blend of being able to understand how your identity can compound and be an aspect in your suffering. And when we're able to go beyond what we perceive to be comfortable, what we perceive to be the normal, regular day in life, what we perceive to just be true, that's what has been a big catalyst for me and my growth moving through so much the last several years. And when I met our guest back in 2021, I was in a very raw and a very vulnerable position. Just started as a chiropractor. I was only like 2 months into my profession, still in a very new space in my city. COVID was still rampant, and my voice was being challenged a lot. And this man really was a very, very potent force where fucking laughed our asses off at the retreat, and really got to connect in a very, very powerful, powerful way. And his philosophy, his character, his values, his integrity, his background in psychology, his own very raw, real approach to life really gave me a lot of permission. And there's been so many synchronicities as well too. We recently reconnected and had a powerful, powerful flow. That could have been a podcast in itself. But I'm really, really excited to be able to bring to the space Matthew, aka Matt Paetz. It's great to have you, brother.
Hello, sir. I don't know who you're about to interview, but this shit sounds interesting to me.
Man, it's about to be a freaking dime, let me tell you. Fun fact, you're also the first remote interview that I've done for the year. So we're playing with a new format for oh, side note, all of my listeners, if you have Spotify, feel free to watch this on Spotify. And if you have the YouTube access, watch this on the YouTube, as full video episodes are available on Spotify. Shout out to all my Spotify listeners and viewers, man. Y'all the best. Y'all give me some sexy stats. And shout out to all the Apple Podcast listeners. I love y'all too. Anyways, this man slapped me with a quote last time I connected with him, and it was, "People will never outperform the opinion they have of themselves." I believe it was from Peter Sage, but
Peter Sage, yeah.
that just catapulted us into a powerful conversation on identity once more. And Matt, I'd really love to just dive in and be able to appreciate your perspective and how the comfort zone is actually what can be the perception and opinions people have of themselves, and why that's important.
Yeah. And before we launch into that, remind me to hire you to do any podcast commercials or promos or anything that I ever do in the future, because
Whatever you need.
you got the
Whatever you need,
voice. I
man.
mean, you just yeah, remind me to do that.
Heard.
Love it. So, yeah, brother, I'll follow your lead. Where do you want to take this?
That dang conversation on, because I see the comfort zone
Hmm.
as a preface for our listeners. I see the comfort zone. I've done a workshop, or I've done a part of a speech. The five zones of discomfort. I've been on Ruby Fremont's podcast as well too, Potent Truth. The comfort zone is important to be able to help people integrate, come home after they venture out. About
Yep.
10%, that's one layer. There's a pain threshold, that's the second layer. There is
Hmm.
the traumatic stage, that's the third layer. And then there's the dissociation. That's when, it's the final stage of uncomfortability. But I think a lot of people, providers in particular, struggle to make decisions from what I've seen in practice and coaching, to
Hmm.
leave a profession, to take care of themselves, to be able to just maybe exit a relationship or set boundaries for themselves. So I'd love
Hmm.
for you to reflect, just what have you found in people that you've coached, people that consultations with as well too, businesses, when it comes to people understanding their comfort zone and how it limits their expression.
Oh boy. Well, the first thing that comes to mind right off what you just said is this word boundaries. And the one thing that I want anyone to understand that's listening is that your boundaries are not other people's punishments. All right. I'll say it again. Your boundaries are not other people's punishments. And I say that because, as anyone knows, I know you do firsthand, when we start to evolve, we start to change our philosophies, our way of thinking, the way we're moving through the world, it's going to disrupt the patterns, the rhythms of whatever relationships are currently present, right? And when we start to change, what happens is we start to realize that some of the patterns or the rhythms of relationships that we currently have, whether it's with family, whether it's with spouse, whether it's with, obviously self, but when we begin to change, it begins to change everything around us. And many people, right, that are close to you may not like those changes at first, right? Because they require you to be who you've always been in order for them to be who they have always been.
Mm.
So when you start to change, it challenges them, right? And the natural um, inclination right off the top is to keep things from changing, right? So when someone consciously begins to set boundaries, it often feels like conflict, right?
I appreciate that, as the brain and the neurology are meant to keep us safe. So when
Hmm.
there's this new stimulus, which is in the form of someone familiar, but they're doing something new, it's like, hey, whoa, what the fuck is this?
Hmm.
What is this? What is this? You said something
Hmm.
important, and I loved it. It disrupts the rhythm of how we're used to interacting,
Hmm.
and now we need to reorganize to be able to rediscover, what's a good way of being able to reconnect to each other and re-engage, because reality is all based off of relation
Hmm.
to one another and to self.
100%. Right now, I always joke, it's like imagine, Thanksgiving dinner. Let's say someone decides that they're going to change their eating habits. Right? It's a pretty easy one for people to wrap their heads around. They're going to change their eating habits. And let's go extreme. Let's say that, they come from a background similar to that's, thoroughbred country, Midwest, steak,
Yeah.
potatoes, all the things. And let's say you go to Thanksgiving this year and you decide to tell your family that you've decided to go vegan, right? Your diet is now vegan. How do you think the majority of those people are going to respond? I can tell you how mine would, right? And at first, let's say that's a boundary. You've decided to go vegan because that's a decision that you have identified as healthier for you for one reason or another. Let's say that you are one of those who are also not attempting to get others to do it, right? You are just making the decision for yourself. And, the response that you may get from those who you love and care about the most, right? Those who you have lived your life potentially um, to make proud, right? Your parents, your cousins, your siblings, whomever's. Um, when they start to give you shit for becoming one of those people, as I would often hear it, uh, like, oh, you're my favorite. Oh, you're so California now.
Oh
Love,
man.
love that one.
Love that
Um,
one.
but it's like those initial, and this is what I mean by your boundaries are not other people's punishments, right? So you making a decision that makes them uncomfortable does not mean that you are doing something inappropriate,
Mm,
right? And it does not mean that you are doing something that is unkind or unjust to other
mm,
just because the decision that you made is challenging them in some way, right? So
right.
I think the biggest thing, and this is in all levels of transformation, I don't give a shit what it is, right? I think one of the biggest things that we all must become, um, I'm gonna say, develop a healthier relationship with is discomfort, right? So we must develop a healthy relationship to discomfort if we wish to make a change, right? So that natural discomfort that exists at that kitchen table, right? Because you have decided that you're not gonna, eat the same foods as they are. It's okay, right? And however they feel about it is also okay.
Yeah.
Right? So I could riff on this forever.
Yeah, no, there's definitely been a theme of conflict, I think, in this first few weeks of life,
Mm.
and or first few weeks of 2024, I
I
guess
was
we
like,
can
how old are you?
say. Um, and I think one of my favorite quotes that kind of like progresses this conversation that we mentioned is, reality is a direct reflection of who we believe ourselves to be.
Hmm.
And I think that a part of being able to lean into discomfort is
Hmm.
allowing us to challenge ourselves, as change is the only constant in life.
Hmm.
People, our brains every millisecond are changing in some way, shape, or form. But in a previous conversation, at Daniel's Rise retreat,
Mm,
there we discussed some philosophy, and there's a
hmm
chiropractic philosophy, and there's signs of life for all my chiropractors and chiropractic students. There's assimilation, so being able to take things in. There's being able to excrete things as well too, things that are no longer serving us. There's growth, of course.
mm,
So like whatever, like the sign of life that something is alive is that it's growing.
hmm
Adaptation is another one. So being able to actually lead to different behavior changes, and then reproducibility or reproduction, the
hmm
ability to pass on, which we used to think was survival of the fittest. We're able to just pass on the genes that make people successful. But I think when it comes to humans, we have this beautiful neocortex and we have this beautiful prefrontal cortex that allows us to be able to consciously engage with our lives and utilize our free
hmm
will for the construction of others and for ourselves, and direct our neuroplasticity and how we want to live our lives and how we want to change our lives. And I think one component to that that is essential for the health of the provider and for other humans is recognition.
mm,
As you gave the awareness of, say, say a puppy falls off, like, I don't know, a cruise ship or something, or there's a puppy in like a river, like us as people, like being able to see life,
hmm
needing like help or recognize something, it does something in us.
Yeah.
And dude, I talked about that the next 2 years straight up, because recognition for self
hmm
and how we're changing and how we're evolving and how we're growing and how there's like an absence of that sign of life.
hmm
It can give us so much life, but we don't create space for it. What's up with that?
No, I love this. It's life recognizes life,
Yeah.
right? And there's no life form that is superior to another. Life is life, no matter the vehicle it may, you know, express itself through. Um, and this happened for me. This awareness came to me in a different journey, prior to us meeting, where I was with a shaman, and we were using plant medicines, and while I was, I always say the first journey I ever experienced saved my life. The second one changed my life. This is the second one that I'm referring to that changed my life. And really, what it was an observation of ego the entire time, which was very disruptive in a beautiful way. Because, like I was so unaware of how mine was operating. Um, and so specifically what was happening, I was sharing a lot of gratitude for the fact that I'm a human being and that I get to be a human being, and that I forget exactly how I put it in the journey, but essentially what I said was like, to be for my life force to be able to express itself, um, essentially more than any other, right? Like I believe that a human being was, at the time I made this comment, it was like a human being's expression of life is superior to others. And I'm just so grateful that I get to be that, during this time. And the shaman challenged me. And he was like, who says that a human
Mhm.
life is, expressing itself more authentically, more fully than any other life form? He's like, do you think this tree right here has any concern about how it's expressing its life, or is it just expressing it in its full ability, right?
Right.
Unapologetically. And then
Right.
he pointed out like the bugs that were close to us, because again, we're in the forest and all these things, and it hit me. It's like, holy shit. Again, ego. My ego is sitting there looking at a tree, being like, my life is better than yours. Right. Looking at an animal like my life is more expressive than yours. But I think the opposite could be true in the sense that when we look at everything that isn't human, it is unapologetic in its
Right.
expression.
It's fully authentic.
It has no other, it has no reservations whatsoever. It doesn't give one fuck what anything thinks, does, whatever. It just works in unison with the life that's around it. And I think that's where, as human beings, we get things so, so, so wrong, is that we
Mm.
spend so, I think it's very necessary, what I'm about to say, but I think it's, um, you know, it's heavily weighted in a, um, call it toxic, call it whatever. It's heavily weighted in um, the words miss me because I don't want to use the word toxic, but let's just run with it.
In a
It's
very
heavily weighted in
conditioned,
the toxic
very
direction.
conditioned,
Yeah.
conditioned direction. If I'm picking up what you're putting down.
Yeah. It's like I think we often trade, and I think there's something that I refer to as functional suffering. And I think what it is in line with what we're talking about. Functional suffering is, when we are heavily prioritizing our um, safety, right? I.e., what is most familiar to us over our potential.
Mm.
Right. I think one of the best, here's another way I'll say it, one of the best quotes I ever heard in relation to those who experience depression, right? And mind you, this is in with respect to those that are genuinely clinically depressed. There's something, acute going on that must be managed in a very professional and appropriate way so that that person can, move forward. But in relation to how often people speak on depression or claim to be depressed, what they're referring to is an emotional state, not a diagnosis,
Correct.
right? You can't be diagnosed as sad, right? It's an emotional state. So I view depression in most cases as the same. Like you're feeling depressed, you're going through a season of depression, right?
It's normal
It's
to experience
normal, right? There's
depression
nothing
and
broken or
anxiety.
wrong, right? And in relation to that specifically, the quote that stuck out to me is from a gentleman that I've looked up to for many years, Maston Kipp. And what he said was, depression is nothing more than denied expression.
Oh, fuck.
I had the same experience. And I think it hits so hard because
Ooh,
when we hear it, we know it's true.
ooh, ooh,
Right.
ooh.
So when you think about someone that's denying expression, which so many are, I believe this is the functional suffering. And that phrase hit me a long time ago when I was working with someone that was discussing a family member that was an alcoholic. And they were talking about, like functional alcoholism, right? Where it's like essentially you're drinking all day long or however often, but you're still able to function, quote unquote, in the world, right? You're still able to maintain some level of stability despite the addiction. And I think that's true for, a lot of our suffering. It's functional, right? It's this low level suffering that we choose when we choose to protect our comfort zones more than our potential, right? Because the soul, like you said, life does, there's two things that uh, signifies life. And I mean this literal, and I mean this throughout the world, right? If you look at nature, you'll see this everywhere. If something has life force, it does two things. You've already mentioned one. It grows, right? Non-negotiable. If it has life force, it will grow. You do not look the same as the day you were born. You will not look the same in 20 years as you do right now, right? There's growth. And then second thing is it must add value for other.
Hmm.
If you look at nature, every single thing is connected,
Hmm.
right? Look at the plants, right? They consume carbon dioxide and give off oxygen so that we and other things can breathe, right? Perfect example. Everything is connected. So life force does two things. It grows and it provides value. I think where most of us exist in functional suffering is as we grow, we repress that evolution, that because of fear of how others may view us, fear of breaking the patterns, breaking the norms. I can't do that because that's not who I am, or that's not, where I come from. People like us don't XYZ, right? You
Hmm.
hear this all the time. And if you talk to those people, you're going to see there's a lot of aggression, there's a lot of sadness, there's a lot of depression, right? Which I believe is the result of this uh, denial of the growth that their spirit, their soul only knows how to do. It's not even just yearning for it. It only knows how to do this, right? And I think when we repress it, we experience depression.
Oh man, that's so rich with different ways to go as yeah, I just think of like emotionally, people
Mhm.
that repress anger oftentimes, like that's what tears are, repressed anger. As that's where I come from.
Often, yeah.
Being able to appreciate denied expression though, because the chiropractic meaning to life and all my chiros and people that have been following Soul Coffee for a minute know is that there's principles in chiropractic. And number two, the chiropractic meaning to life, the expression of intelligence through matter.
Mhm.
But if the matter is repressing the intelligence, which is which the emotions or the energetic state connects the matter to the intelligence, well, then we're missing out. We're not expressing everything. And I love animals as an example for chiropractic, or just babies for life. Like a baby doesn't know, it hasn't been traumatized, quote unquote, to this,
Trained.
where it conditioned to like withhold itself. Like it's
Mhm.
authentically expressing. Same thing with like cat, dog, like whatever, maybe like dog, like sees another dog, it goes off like,
Yeah, I got the door closed right now because they
oh.
will authentically express themselves if I open it.
And I love that you touched on that because I think that there's an element. I looked at some of the notes that we were riffing on because I can remember
Mhm.
podcast back in 2021. He said self trust is a skill.
Mhm.
Self trust is a skill, and in that capacity, being able to move through and have that faith or have that trust that you're gonna make it.
Mhm.
That's where when it came to the 5 levels of discomfort and navigating that, even if like say you weren't intentionally trying to experience something traumatic or disassociate from, it's the journey back home in which you build that self-trust.
Mhm.
And at the same right, when you intentionally go 10% outside your comfort zone, you, staying on your example, you go vegan or whatever
Mhm.
around your family, or you take that cold shower, or you
Mhm.
start your business, or you start your side hustle, or you talk to your boss and you're like, hey, I can't be spoken to like that anymore. I need to set this boundary, or your coworkers or your
Or your
friends, or
spouse.
I was about to say, or your relationship, or here's
Mhm.
the other one, how you talk to yourself.
Mhm.
And with that capacity, self trust is also accumulative, and I think that's so big because that can be a skill that you build to stop denying and repressing your expression, allow yourself to express more often.
Mhm. And I think people need to learn to trust that your emotional states won't kill you, period.
Mm,
Right? They,
mm,
the behaviors in which you take within those states may be harmful, right? But the emotion itself, the discomfort itself, is not harming you, right? But the challenge is, much like you've already referenced, in the brain, it doesn't know the difference between real and emotional pain. It's hardwired to avoid pain at all costs,
mm.
right? So emotional pain to the brain is the equivalent of putting your hand on a hot stove. Don't do it, right? And for good reason, right? If we're in pain, that must mean we're in harm's way, right? So if we allow this thing that's causing us some level of pain to persist, it will eventually lead to harm or death, right? Which is why we're hardwired to avoid it. This is where being a human being is really powerful because, like you said in the top of the conversation, we have the ability to discern whether or not we are in harm's way or if we're just uncomfortable.
Yeah, we have that delineation.
Mhm.
I think
But oftentimes people interpret the discomfort as harm,
mm,
so
and then
they'll run.
they can't lean into it, or they haven't, excuse me, they haven't cultivated the capacity
Mhm.
to lean into it because it's
Yeah.
available for people. I was talking with a good friend yesterday who was experiencing some, I say, depressive symptoms or depression.
Mhm.
I reminded them, I was like, hey, just so you know, like this can be temporary.
Mhm.
Like it's normal. I let them know, like it's normal to experience anxiety. It's normal to experience depression. Like that's
Yeah.
part of our humanness to be able to
I
do
have this
so.
week myself.
It's waves, but
Mhm.
it's how. And I told them, I was like, pay attention, because
Mhm.
now you have an opportunity to really cultivate a skill set, a tool set to be able to help you out of this state. So that way,
Mhm.
when if you visit here in the future, you know how you can get out of it, or you're like litmus testing. You're the independent variable, Dr. Jordan
Mhm.
Bonham.
Well, one thing on this that I'll point out that I think is an extreme, this was a game changer for me, right? And uh, it's breaking down a trigger in three parts,
Oh, I love it. It's important.
right? And this is universal, right? And when I say trigger, I don't mean just a negative one or a difficult one or, a traumatic one. I mean, a trigger is anything that like, initiates or cultivates a response, right? It evokes a response is the word I was looking for. So triggers break down to three universal components 100% of the time. So the first thing is there's always the event, whatever it was. It could be the tone of someone's voice. It could be the look someone gives you, the words that you read or heard,
The smell
the
of
smell,
something.
anything, right? It could be the person cutting you off in traffic. It could be the whatever the event was, right? So the first thing is always the event. The second thing is the interpretation of the event. the meaning in which we give it, right? And then the third thing is the physiological or emotional response, right? So you have the event, the interpretation, the response. Now, really quickly, of the three, or yeah, of the three, the first one is the event. When the event occurs, well, let me back this up. So of the three things, the third one is the response, right? Which of the first two are you actually responding to? The event or the interpretation?
You're responding to the interpretation, as I perceive that as your perception of, because it same thing can happen to me and you, and we have completely different responses and completely different things that form from that. So our perception is the key, which in lies between the space of the meaning we assign and then the emotional response, that space between.
Ding, 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 ding. 100% of the time. 100% of the time, the only thing you're responding to is the interpretation you've given that experience. Right? That's the difference between, uh, something happening and you perceiving it as further evidence as why you're not enough,
Ooh, further evidence. Ooh,
right?
that's good.
Right? Let's say that at the top of the show, the mic didn't work, right? That could be the event. You could interpret that as see, this is why I shouldn't be fucking doing this. Nothing ever
Oh,
works for me.
yeah.
I and spend all this money on this good stuff and I still can't figure it out. It's because I'm stupid, because this will never work, because people like me aren't successful, blah, blah,
Shut up. You don't know me.
blah. Right? That could be the interpretation, right? Or the interpretation is, all right, you know, this is going off center, but like this is exciting. It's a thing we get to figure out because whatever it is, I now know how to fix it and we get to keep it moving. And by the way, I can use this as a perfect example as to how to move through shit when it doesn't go the
Right.
way that you expect it to.
Right. Oh, that's good.
It's, it's two different responses to the exact same thing.
Right.
Right? But the problem is most of us unconsciously, right? This is why self-awareness in this work is so important. Most of us will use whatever the events are. We are unconsciously seeking confirmation
Mm.
to protect the identities we're operating from.
Yeah, the identities and the perceptions that we're operating from, because then we'll have more safety, even if that's a disempowering perspective. As one, I think it's a perfect segue. Another flow that we had is like let go, or a lot of people, struggle to let go of their pain, struggle to let go
Mhm,
of their circumstances, their environment, a lot of their realities, which Dr. Joe Dispenza talks about time, circumstances, environment, and body. People get
mhm,
addicted to those three in some way, different shape or form, which
mhm,
perpetually leads to their suffering. And that's because, there's a fear of where if they let go of what gives them significance, say pain, then like you mentioned, the next flow is then, well, if there is this awareness that someone's in pain, now they're able to like alert someone.
mhm.
Life recognizes life. So it's like, okay, they're gaining this awareness. And then that gives them the validity, like I'm significant enough to warrant this worry or warrant this response in someone.
Mhm.
So they have a tough time exchanging their pain or their whatever it may be, because then they'll potentially be lonely or they won't be important or they won't be significant enough
Right.
with that without no longer being able to identify with their diagnosis or with their suffering.
Right. So it's like if I've been broke my whole life, this is my true story, right? Or was. This was my identity for a very long time. Um, if I was struggling financially, uh, I could guarantee that others would show up to help me, take care of me, care,
Yep.
right? So what I learned was, as long as I am in struggle, I have connection.
Ooh, ooh.
Because
Mm.
here's the other caveat. Many who I grew up around suffered with the same addiction, being broke, right? Addiction in the way in which you described it and Joe Dispenza teaches. Right? So what I learned was, as long as I suffer from the same thing, I remain connected to my tribe, to my people, to my whatever. The challenge became when I started to challenge that narrative and I started to grow beyond it, which was very messy, right? Still is at times. Right. But as I challenged myself to move through, and eventually my identity began to evolve into something much more empowering, much more in line with what I'm capable of versus, you know, the circumstance in which I came from, then my doing better became the biggest threat to my connections. Like I said, your boundaries are not other people's punishments. So what happened was I started to improve. Others were not moving in the same direction, not meaning that they were doing anything worse or lesser or whatever. I began making different decisions than those in which I was spending my time with. And it became the biggest threat to our relationship, right? Ask anyone that is stopping or quitting drinking. What happens to their social groups?
Mm. Shifts.
Almost immediately, right? Oh, you don't drink anymore? All right, I'm going to stop inviting you out, right? Or you don't want to go out and be in those environments, although you care about the people you're hanging out with, right? All of a sudden, your change of behavior becomes the greatest threat to the connection with the people. And this is the part where most people will begin to fall off because that shift feels like a direct threat to my survival, right? Because as human beings, we are pack animals. Pack animals require the acceptance and the approval of others in order to survive, right? Because if anyone, you yourself or anyone listening has ever, watched or seen anything on pack animals and then and in the wild, what happens to the animal that gets rejected or abandoned for any reason, right? What would you say? What happens to that animal that gets rejected from the pack for any reason?
They're gonna die.
100% of the time, right? Because we as pack animals, we can't, as much as people learn how to survive on their own, that's not how we're wired, right? So what that means to your nervous system when you make the changes and people start to reject them in whatever way that or you start to feel rejected in whatever ways,
Mm.
to your body, it says, if you do this, you die.
Mm-hmm. I'm
If you
done.
stop drinking and your friends stop hanging out with you, you die alone.
Mm.
No wonder this shit is so hard.
Mm.
Ain't got nothing to do with the alcohol.
Oof.
Right. And I, with respect to the layers of this conversation that we're not touching
Yes.
on.
Yes.
So
Right.
before people start showing up in your box and saying like, what the fuck, you don't know what you're talking about, blah, 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 blah. Check yourself and just listen.
I'd like to just affirm, like, yo, we're here at Soul Coffee. We're of a very encompassing energy and vibration, where it's based in curiosity, inclusion to the extent. And if like people got questions or they got contributions,
Yeah.
more than welcome to. And if you're just here to just berate something, shut the fuck up. So we're not going to call those people in. We're going to call in the people that are curious and things. Back to this tribe notion, though. We were having
Mm-hmm.
this dope pre-chat the other week, and the empowering thing is like if there was one human being on this world, the species would die. We need at least bare minimum one person, obviously, of course, of someone else that can, conceive a baby and
Right.
perpetuate the human
Procreate.
line.
Yeah.
But the beautiful thing is that you just need one person. And I'm not saying it can be a partner, but man, you have one person to believe in you. Like that's in my story, like that's all that got
Mm-hmm.
me through. I had my boy Harris Borowski, like got me through the toughest part of my life, which was pretty much from seventh grade,
Mm-hmm.
probably about sophomore year in high school.
Mm-hmm.
And this has been coming up. I'm gonna go into a
Shout out puberty.
big shout out, big shout out. And shout out to Lou, as we all like we just had each other. Like, of course, we had everyone or the Joneses and things too. But getting here to Tucson, I was talking to my friend yesterday. Like, it was fucking dark, man. Like, it was dark. There
Mm-hmm.
was such a hole, which I've gone in different capacities. I'm going back to more so the having that one homie. You have one friend that can build your community, that you can chop it up with, that you can reflect with, that you can experience life with, that you can be able to revel and be able to all the six signs of life. You can recognize, you can assimilate, you can eat with, you can let go of things with, you can be able to adapt and
Mm-hmm.
learn, and you can be able to grow. And then I'm not saying you got to reproduce with them, but what you are reproducing is
Mm-hmm.
a certain energy and a certain emotional state
Mm-hmm.
consistently. And that's, baby, that's a sign that something's alive and something's well. And as you go through this process, like your tribe, your community, it's gonna change. Like
Mm-hmm.
there's different priorities, there's different focuses. And if people have a loving perception and awareness of who you are and who you're efforting to be, like, I can't be around my people in Connecticut and I fucking miss them so much.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the realest relationships I have are those we just pick up that baton right where we left off, and it's the best.
Yeah. There's no question or challenge or, you know,
Berating or
yeah.
shame or guilting or reprimand.
Yeah. I have the same thing. You know, I moved out of Indiana in '03 and came back for a brief time in between living in New York City and then moving back to, and moving out to LA. And like my boys, I'm talking like ride or dies, do not talk to me anymore. They took extreme, my interpretation is they took extreme offense to me leaving as if I had abandoned them.
Mm,
And when I go back and speak to many of them over the years, which I have, it's been a while, but you know, we've grown into two different, you know, two different directions,
yeah.
right? It's heartbreaking, right? But at the end of the day, I trust that they're doing what feels right to them,
Yes.
and I'm going to continue to do what I feel is right for me.
Yes.
And there will always be love and respect and care. And if I ever got the call that they needed something, I would show up to the conversation. But um, I had to learn that you know, carrying guilt or shame for my decisions because I made the decision to unsubscribe from the philosophy that, you know, you must stay where you're from and, you know, live in the cul-de-sac with all your relatives and go to the same high schools and, you know, do all these things. Like that wasn't the life that I felt called to live. And I made that decision. And I had to accept that, you know, the life that I'm living is the one that I not only have created, but it's it's the one that feels fulfilling to me.
Mm, mm. And I think with that, it's honoring what's inside you.
Hmm.
It's recognizing the life inside you, which is, you know, the focus, of course, for, you know, providers to be able to take care of themselves and be able to nourish themselves and be able to give yourselves permission to experience more of this beautiful life. Like that's the mission of Soul Coffee. So that way you can experience more of this life once more because
Hmm.
that's what we're supposed to. And like a lot of providers, they get into teacher jobs, they get into they're a parent or
Hmm.
they're a healthcare professional, and it's just there might be a gap or it might just be really fucking hard because there's so many different factors that you couldn't foresee,
Hmm.
like in the unknown. Like I'm reading the psychology of money, and he talks about like you essentially you got to plan for the unknown. You got to plan for some kind of cushion. And I'm translating this not just from a financial like savings state, but from like an emotional savings state.
Hmm.
Allow for space, expect some unknown and some like you to get slapped like to an extent so that way you don't get taken off course and you spiral now into a maladaptive, stuck, negative perception of reality. And I think this, you know, bridges to, you know, one last point before, you know, we get to end this conversation in the next
Hmm.
5, 10 minutes or so is, you know, one quote that you said is you don't get into psychology because you have your shit together. And I think I'd be miffed if I didn't get the chance to, you know, explore at least just a short
Yeah.
conversation and what brought us part of what brought us together. It's like we both came from being sexually traumatized as
Hmm.
men or as boys when we were younger.
Hmm.
And that's something that I want to put more energy towards throughout this year, throughout my whole life, because I believe the stats are, I think it's like out of all the people that get abused sexually, I believe 1 out of every 8 of them is a boy. And
Hmm.
the vast majority are under 18. The vast majority of people that we know. And that carried a lot of humiliation for me.
Hmm.
It wasn't even the event itself, it was like the humiliation that came from it. But,
Hmm.
uh, you know, how did you get through this could be a podcast episode in itself, but what would
Yeah.
you attribute your healing in that capacity to be able to be with your beautiful wife now or fiance,
Yeah.
excuse me,
Yeah.
uh, when that was so far of a distant reality for you?
Well, I mean, this absolutely is its own podcast episode because there's nothing that I'm unwilling to talk about, right? And if I were to put it very cleanly, and I think this goes back to the power of one, so I'll connect those two dots. Sometimes all we need to know is that someone else understands, right? And even further, if that person who understands also is an example that you can move through, move beyond, begin to live, because, sorry, I live near the airport, if that's a thing. God, this mic is phenomenal.
Yeah,
Uh, um, but you know, with that being said, I'll say this. So my sexual abuse began around the age of I think I was either almost 6 or I just turned 6. Uh, and it lasted for about 5 years. Right? Quite literally, there's no two things men can do sexually that I did not experience by my 6th birthday. Right. And I say that not to throw in a bunch of heavy stuff into a conversation, but I say it to be very honest and give context to where I'm going. Right? The biggest difference between me and I think many others was that my abuse story wasn't violent, right? It wasn't met with aggression. It was an older male, obviously, and I was convinced that I was special. Right? So I came to believe that I was kind of the chosen one in many ways, is how
Mm,
it felt,
wow.
compared to my siblings and relatives and stuff. I was the chosen one. And I literally was told that this these experiences were to help me understand and know what to do when I'm with a woman in my future. Right? This was the grooming that took place. And what in hindsight, looking back on it, what I realized is eventually I adopted this belief that my sole purpose on this planet was to be a physical experience for others. It was an identity of mine, right? And skipping a few of the chapters here. I mean, my story includes everything from obviously sexual abuse to um, uh, struggles with sexuality, to drugs, alcohol abuse, to becoming a prostitute, to nearly committing suicide at the age of 33. When I say nearly, it wasn't a thought. I had a loaded 45 caliber to my temple. I was less than 3 pounds of pressure from accidentally making the ultimate decision. Right. So when I say you don't get into psychology because you have your shit together, right? I learned a lot of what I teach on, coach on, talk on, by way of my own personal experiences. And coming from where I came from too, like I said, I grew up in the country in rural Indiana of a town about 700, right? I wear this flannel proudly.
That's what you look like from the Midwest.
But what's interesting, going back to identity, it's something that I learned, I'm 39 now. So I started dressing more. The more that I started to speak on my truth, the more that I started to dress more like where I was from. And in hindsight, I realized it was very intentional.
Mm,
It was a fuck you to everyone that I grew up with and where I came from. And what I mean by that is this interpretation, this perception that men are only supposed to be, beer drinking, gun toting, truck driving, screaming at your wife at the dinner table, fighting people in the bars, like to prove your masculinity. That's where I came from.
right.
So the more that I began to speak on struggles with sexuality, sexual abuse, right, insecurities, shame, all of these things that, where I come from would be, called all the names and ridiculed and bullied and seen as a weakness in many ways. I started to take almost appreciation for the contradiction that I appeared to be. I hold the appearance of one, but I will speak on everything that most that I come from are afraid to talk about.
Mm,
Right. So if that makes any sense,
yeah.
I realize like it in many ways it was almost like a personal mission, right, of mine to kind of break the mold. And what I found is a lot of men, right, that I've coached over the years, and I'm currently coaching, a lot of men I'm relatable in many ways. I can shoot the guns. I travel, lift the truck. I could, I used to drink the beer. I could do all the things, right? So I can meet them in that place, but also holding space for that real conversation. I'll share my story and I don't share it for me. I share it for them. I always say this, like, your pain is for others, right? Your pain is for others, right? Your passion is for you. I teach something called the purpose formula, and where this is coming from specifically is this. It's pain plus passion times safety equals purpose, right? Break this down quickly. So pain plus passion times safety equals purpose. Pain, right, is the ability to extract the wisdom from your struggles instead of just the suffering. It's the deep trauma work that you and I riff on so often, right? That we've done, we're doing, right? So it's the ability to go into your past, go into your struggles, your experiences, your traumas, whatever they may be, and extract the wisdom from those experiences, the understanding,
The
right?
lessons
Instead of just the suffering,
in it.
right? So the ability that to extract plus passions. In my opinion, passions are nothing more than the shit you like to do. It's the things that you find interesting. It's the things you find motivating, inspiring to self, right? It could be a career, it could be a hobby of some sort, it could be anything, anything that lights you up, right? Brings you alive. It's a passion, right? And I'm firmly believe that purpose is found inside of your pain, not your passions, right? Because, like I said earlier, just like life, purpose must do two things. It must challenge you to grow, and it must provide value to others in order for us to feel a sense of purpose.
Deeper contribution to the collective. We're just being mental creatures as well too. We can form and craft a way to be able to contribute to the whole, which that was one thing I didn't get the chance to touch on, but I love Spain. It's like it's the impulse, but that's where we get to extract the work to adapt very
Right?
wonderfully.
And there's no greater value, no greater service I believe one can give to others than to be able to
Mhm.
extract the lessons, the wisdoms from their personal struggle,
Yep.
right? To be of value, to help, to be of service to other, right? To be an example, to understand how to hold a safe place for others that are going through something similar, right? So purpose is found inside of the pain because the pain is what gives you the wisdom, right? It gives you the ability, the lessons, right? And then your passions, whatever it may be, is just the vehicle to deliver that wisdom to others.
Love the
So
authentically.
yeah, so you being a chiropractor, right? Could be a passion of yours. Chiropractic, whatever this being the service of a chiropractor, that's the vehicle that brings you in direct contact to so many that are seeking the wisdom that your pain has allowed you to better understand or connect with or lean into or however you would describe that, right? So being a chiropractor is the vehicle. It's not the source of your purpose. It's simply the tool that brings you in direct contact to others that are that are yearning for or aligning with what it is that you understand or
It's the
have
most
come to
efficient.
understand,
It's the most efficient way.
right? And then time safety. Why do I multiply this? Because one, safety is the core root of all human behavior. I don't care if it's extreme isolation or extreme anger,
Hmm.
right? Safety is the core. On some level, you are choosing the behaviors you are choosing because it creates some semblance of safety, security, right? And I mean more emotional than I do physical. Both exist, right? Are necessary. But in most of our daily lives, our behaviors represent an attempt to achieve a psychological or an emotional safety.
And how would you define safety?
Um, not being rejected.
Actually, not being rejected. How else would you define safety?
Um, the what it is that what you're asking?
In a pure sense, like how would you define, like utilize other words to define like what safety is? Because it's a fascinating subject for me,
Yeah. I
especially like
think
studying that polyvagal neuroplasticity.
yeah, no, I love this. I think in a kind of a layman's approach to the conversation, safety is being among others whom you feel accepted and understood.
Yeah, it's like a space where you can venture mentally and physically, where you can be in a relaxed physiology.
Yeah. Because safety is not the same as comfortable.
No, no, it's not. There's
I'm
definitely
I find I'm very safe in conversations with you in your presence. But many of the conversations that we journey into
ooh,
can become very uncomfortable,
ooh, that's a great distinction.
right? But I feel safe because I know even if we are on opposite ends of a conversation, but a belief or an opinion, we are not in conflict, right? And that takes a lot of cultivating. It takes a lot of, I know that because you've done your work, I've done mine. We can come to a difference of opinion and see them as just that.
And there isn't a threat
There's
to
no
either
threat.
of our existence.
Even if the conversation is extremely uncomfortable or the question is very challenging,
Mm,
it's not a threat, right?
mm.
Like, and so I think that's an extremely important piece to safety, right? But Going back to the equation really quickly because I don't want to confuse others. Pain, the ability to extract the wisdom from your struggles instead of just the suffering. Passion, the vehicle in which you could deliver that wisdom to others. Safety is nothing more than qualified support. The presence of at least one who understands what you're going through and ideally understands the journey in which you are embarking on.
Or is, I was about to say, or is open to understanding
Right.
and is efforting to do that, even
Right.
if they don't understand it.
So
Like,
safety in this equation represents mentorship,
mm,
sisterhood, brotherhood,
yeah, yeah.
right? A
Hmm.
tribe of like mind going who have committed to a similar future instead of just come from the same past,
Ooh,
right?
ooh,
Because we're all venturing into the unknown. I don't care how many days are the same,
yeah.
right? So so put these together. You have wisdom from your suffering, or your struggles, right? You have a vehicle in which you can deliver that news, that wisdom, that lesson to others, that understanding. And then you are supported by at least one who have been there, who understand what you are going through and what you're inevitably going to experience on this journey.
Mm,
I believe with those three things in place, you can create a life that not only has a deeper sense of meaning and fulfillment, but allows you to connect with and develop a healthier relationship to that deeper sense of purpose that we're all yearning for. Because
mm,
purpose is an emotional state, not a destination.
mm,
It's not a physical thing you can find,
mm,
right? When people say, I'm trying to find purpose, trying to find a purpose in my life, you can't. Because to find something, you're out here. Often, this is how we interpret the word find. It's out here somewhere,
mm.
right? But purpose can only be discovered inside of your suffering. So we must be willing to lean in within a safe community to the parts of ourselves that we do not like in order to be able to extract that deeper understanding, that wisdom, move through so that we have something of significant value to offer to other,
Yeah.
right?
This tying into Annalise's episode that just dropped last week, it's so rich because then, like what we talked about, you're not no longer identifying as your trauma, but you now have built a relationship with. There is a distinction, there's a separation.
Yeah.
You can have a different perception of than the information that it presented that is the very raw, big stimulus, the emotional component and the physical sensation component to it. Tie it all together, you now have a
Mhm.
new thought and you now have a new reality. You have a new reality because now you can apply this new thought in a new way because your perception internally is now
Mhm.
different.
Yeah.
Ah, brother, this is nourishing. Tell
Yeah.
me and tell the good people if they'd like to connect to you, how can they reach
Mhm.
out to you?
So my website is morethan a business.co.co. Uh, and it's very intentional because, as you know, my work now is leaned into supporting wellness coaches and practitioners and developing a business that reaches and exceeds the 100K mark and has nothing to do with the money. It has everything to do with the clarity of self offer, right? That is necessary to reach that point. I like to take the trauma informed approach to building a business that feels more fulfilling and meaningful. It just happens to provide an income that your family can depend on. So more than a business.co. And yeah.
Love it. And are you available on the IGs still?
Yeah, I mean, I have an account at Matthew Paetz on all things, and if I don't get back to you, it's because I have a relationship with social media where I like to spend more time off of it than on it.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but if you come through the website, there's a link there to take a quiz. How ready are you to scale your coaching business?
Mm,
Um, and anyone that comes through that, you will 100%, will be able to connect.
I love it. And final question for Soul Coffee. How would you express your flavor and origin of Soul Coffee to the world?
Say more.
How would you describe either the process of like the bean or the flavor that is your expression of your soul to the world?
Oh, man. The word transparent keeps coming to mind. I'm just a man learning to give a fuck, quite frankly. Right? Matter of fact, let me answer this in a different way. So, in my desk here, I went through some trainings recently uh, on developing, purpose and mission and understanding of that. And one of the main exercises was that you get to write your own eulogy.
Nice, memento mori.
So if you're open to it, I will read what the eulogy that I've written for my own life, and perhaps that will answer the question.
I think that'd be a lovely honor to be able to receive.
So what I say here is Matthew Paetz was a loving and dedicated husband to his wife Allison, and a present and secure father for all of the lives within his care. He believed that life was to be lived with a deep sense of meaning. He was committed to leading by example, to provide a path for all who knew him so that they too could transform their pain into something meaningful. His work was dedicated to helping others achieve a deep sense of meaning and freedom. His company, more than a business, embodied this dedication by helping more than 100,000 people turn their purpose into a business so that they too could change the narrative of their lives and leave a legacy they could be proud of. His passion project was building the ranch, a place that he and Allison called home. This property became a physical representation of what their relationship stood for: love, kindness, commitment, and legacy.
Sounds like a delicious, potent brew.
Mm. How I managed to get through that without crying is another question, I guess.
Yeah. Oh, bro, I appreciate you. I
Mhm.
appreciate our listeners as always. Thank you so much. May y'all take this good energy into the world. May y'all be able to reach out to Matt as you may feel called and be able to give yourselves more permission to explore in this capacity and be able to express yourself as your own unique version of this beautiful process that life has brewed you to be and crafted you to be. And until next time, peace.